crusade against Muslims in that area. So they're trying to get here, avoid the middleman. But remember, they had new map making technologies, latitude and longitude were brand new, so they knew that if they went this way, they knew where they were on the globe. And don't forget, these people were incredibly smart. Everybody knew the world was round. Nobody thought the world was flat. In fact, that would become a myth afterwards to try to dramatize how brave and brilliant people like Columbus were. And so the original explorers tried to bounce around the coast of Africa. By the way, that's when the sextant became such a big deal, because when they got down here, they couldn't see the North Star anymore. They couldn't use the astrolabe. And the sextant really could measure the sun at its height. And when they got here, yes, they got involved in much of the slave trade that was here. There was a very burgeoning slave trade across the Sahara, and so they started trading for slaves too. There was a huge slave trade all across the Mediterranean. And I have to be very clear about it. I'm going to tell you this again, but make sure we get this down. They got involved in the slave trade, and slavery had nothing to do with race. In fact, the concept of race did not exist. There was color, skin, without race. Now, I know you're doing the math. Did you get that thing about race? Yeah. Write it down. Race had nothing to do with slavery. Okay. So they went bouncing around. I'll tell you one funny story when they got here, though. And they started trading here for slaves. In fact, this is going to be called the Slave Coast, and sometimes the Gold Coast, because there appeared to be more gold. There really wasn't, but appeared to be. But when they got there, they noticed people who lived in what is now Ghana or a place like that would be like there'd be a puddle, and they would jump and try to get out of the puddle, and they act really like they were scared of water. And the Portuguese went and stopped in the water. You dumb natives. You might know why they were scared of the water. Parasitic worms would crawl in, and then the best part about these worms were they would. This is the best part. They'd lay their eggs, and then they'd explode out of their skin. Isn't that awesome? What? Horrific. Enjoy your lunch? Okay, with that, let's get to a couple of the explorers. So I was exploring the west coast of Africa, and in 1487, Bartolomé Diaz made it around, he made it to the Cape of Good Hope. And by the way, they called it the Cape of Good Hope because it was such a horrific trip around Africa. The winds were horrible. There were no natural harbors. It was really hard to find places for fresh water. There were brackish, swampish areas against people who were very violent. Here, and then down here is a desert. It was a miserable trip, and it took forever, and the winds were horrible. Remember, these are sailing vessels. It took so long to get there. And the wind had this perpetually blowing them that way. It was just well, actually, it was like this. Wind, no wind at all right there. And so it was a terrible trip. And so they made it, but it's like, oh. In fact, it's no coincidence that one of the reasons Columbus, when he first arrived, when he went to Portugal first, they went, maybe. But they tried one more time. And that's Vasco da Gama. And da Gama, when talking to other people trying to make this same trick, da Gama learned something different. Watching the wind and knowing the patterns, he realized that if he could use the wind and just sail, it was easier to sail straight south. So use the trade wind to tack this way, then move around. You had better winds. So they went off literally into the middle of nowhere, the middle of the South Atlantic. And it shocked them how much colder it got as they went further south. But they could never have done this if not the good maps with latitude and longitude, where they knew that since it's a sphere, even though they had no idea where they're at, they knew they could loop back up and there would still be land. Yes, they start running out of water. The men suffer from scurvy, which is a lack of vitamin C, a horrible disease where you lose skin tone. It feels like a constant flu. Your joints literally begin to dissolve, which, by the way, is not like, hey, my joints are dissolving. No, it hurts really bad. Blisters. Then the parasite. Oh, no parasites. But then they made it here faster. And this is revolutionary. They made it here and then bounced their way up fought a number of battles and just sailed into harbors and just started shooting people to get. The Portuguese were, one of the ways the Portuguese conquered was their shocking brutality. It just shocked. Europeans were so brutal, so violent. It shocked the people of India, for example. And he would arrive in India in 1498. Now, he's the one who got to India and just assumed there are two peoples in the world, Christians and Muslims. And so when he got there and saw people in India and realized most of them were not Muslims, they must be Christians, even though they worship these strange idols with 8 arms and elephants. They're Hindus. But they had the pictures of Shiva and all these things. Oh, they must be Christians because they're not Muslims. Which I think it's just amazing how when you have your mind so focused on something, they just assume they had to be Christians. Well, they tried to trade. They brought, when they went, they assumed that the people in India would want just like trinkets and things like that. No, they wanted cloth and gold. They had been trading here for hundreds of years and making a lot of money. So they just laughed Da Gama out. In fact, ran him out, even though he did shell some people and enslave some people, because that's what Europeans did. But once this happened, the Portuguese realized, we got it. Da Gama convinced them to send massive fleets. Yeah.
I was going to ask, when did Hinduism become something that people like knew around? Like, because they didn't know about it, did they?
Not outside. Well, people here knew about it.
Yeah, but like the other.
But not like in Europe. No, not until the mid. They finally figured it out in about 1520, 1530. But still, that's a pretty long time.
Yeah.
And you can only, it takes about a year to get there from Portugal, which that should tell you how tough those guys were. I mean, they were greedy, horrible, and brutal, but also tougher than heck. And what they did is because cannon, they had that advantage over these trading kingdoms that just, they had some arquebuses, but they didn't have even close to what the Portuguese had. They were able to get trading harbors and able to play one group of India against another, and began a trading empire there at Calicut. Calicut became the big trading port that actually, it's complex how they did it. They found another city that was upset at Calicut and used them as allies to take it, and then the Portuguese took advantage of both sides when they were beat. They beat each other down. This became a major trading harbor for them, and they would get right next to it, a place called Goa would become a Portuguese colony, and they would use that to form trading colonies, and that's how they did it. They didn't conquer a whole area. They just took a city and a harbor and made that their empire. Now, Da Gama was brutal and violent and desperate to kill, especially Muslim traders there. But Alfonso Albuquerque, who had a very mixed reputation, another brutal but realistic Portuguese ruler, he's the one who took Goa, and then one of the biggies would be Malacca. And do I have a map of Malacca? I'll come back. Right here. He took Malacca right here. And that is important. You can imagine the importance of trade if you control this strait right here. So Goa, Calicut, you have to Mombasa, this part of Mozambique. They put a trading port here, and a couple spots along there. Just enough to get trading locations, Albuquerque. And this would set up a Portuguese trading empire. Portugal became wealthy beyond anybody's comprehension, because they could bring back these spices and silk and other products from there, and there was no middleman. In fact, you can see a direct correlation between the growth of Portugal as a trading kingdom and the decline of the entire Mediterranean in trade. The entire Mediterranean dropped. It's like everybody bypassed it. And these dynamic new kingdoms were the ones dominating on the Atlantic up here. So, this Portuguese trading kingdom. Now, I've got to be clear about this. They took all the gold, they blew it, they made terrible decisions. Portugal's very small, and so, yes, they built a big trading kingdom, but it wasn't big enough to hold it. You see a similar thing, the Netherlands did this, built a massive trading empire, but it was always very small. And so eventually other countries would invade and capture. And that's where we get to Christofo Colon, or as we call who? That's Columbus. That's Columbus. Columbus, too, was a sailor, a navigator. He had been trying to, well, actually, he too wanted to get involved in the Portuguese expedition around Africa, but he was late. And he wanted to be the first because he knew if you were there first, you could get the best trading deals or the best exploit the natives more. I should have almost forgot something. So when it got to Calcutta, there were also a lot of Muslim traders from here that were trading here. And there's a huge Muslim population in India. What is it now? The second largest Muslim population in the world is in India. The largest is in Indonesia, which seems a little, you just think about where it started, but also there can be a lot more people here than here, just for a couple of reasons I can think of like this. But back to this. When he got to Calcutta, there were these massive warehouses where all these goods would be, and there were also craftsmen who would work in these warehouses and like make cloth, you could make amazing textiles. And they called those warehouses in India, the name for these was factory. And so that's where the term factory, where a warehouse where goods come from, and therefore it kind of made sense, warehouse where production was. So back to this. So Columbus came a little bit late. He was a seafarer. He had been up to Iceland. He had traveled all around. He had been down to the Cape Verde Islands, he'd been to the Canary Islands. He might have been down to here, but we're not sure. Experienced seafarer, he very well could have been from Genoa. Everyone says he's from Genoa, but we don't know. We really don't know where Columbus is from. We don't know what the guy looked like. Every painting we see of Columbus was long after he died. And they made a big deal that he didn't speak Italian. And how could he be from Italy if he didn't speak Italian? That's actually a valid question. And there's two things about that. First off, remember the term the vernacular? Well, that was brand new. And the printing press would contribute to this. And that was brand new. So it's possible that he spoke a dialect of Italian that was so difficult for others to understand, they didn't realize he was Italian. But the other thing was this. This was also the time of the Inquisition. And the Inquisition in Spain were trying to root out the Muslim and Jewish influence. If you were Muslim, or more importantly, if you were Jewish, would you say that you're Jewish? When they could say, we want you to convert and torture you, and put you over boiling coals. So if you were Jewish, might you say, I'm Italian? So we don't know. It's one of those great mysteries. Columbus is a total mystery. He went to Portugal, turned him down. Went to Spain, turned him down. Went back to Portugal, went back to Spain. He was on his way to France when Spain agreed to pay for his trip. And let's go back up here. There we go. So they paid for his trip. And what he said was this. Let me get my globe back. He, knowing the earth was round, he said, this is what we're going to do. If the Portuguese are beating us, and when he was suggesting this, the Portuguese were bogged down right here with the awful winds I told you about. And they were bogged down here. Diaz has made it here, but this was a nightmare. The next expedition got lost, disappeared. And so he's saying it would be a lot easier. Why get caught down here? We know the latitude of China. We know the latitude of India. We know these things. A couple different people have made that trip. Marco Polo was probably the best known. He's in your textbook, even though Marco Polo appears to have made up a lot of this stuff. But I don't know. But we know that latitude. So if we drop down to that latitude, then using our astrolabe, sail across, we'll eventually get there. Does that make sense? The problem was this. Toscanelli, Brunelleschi's friend, Brunelleschi, the guy that did the dome and that painting from the painting of the baptistry in the day the universe changed. Toscanelli said the world was about a third smaller than what it really was. He guessed wrong. Basically, just using bad geometry, which is actually kind of weird because a couple different Greeks, and I mentioned this once before, in Egypt, had already figured out almost the exact circumference of the Earth 1,700 years before, or 1,700 years before that. But Toscanelli didn't have it. So Columbus convinced them. So they just dropped down, just kept going. And what got in the way? Something right here. And that's how Columbus got it. And he had that map. The assumption was it would be a long trip. Now, when I was in school, I know this is not long after Columbus made his trip, but when I was in school, it was a big deal. You know, Columbus was his hero, and they thought they were going to sail off at the edge of the world, and the monsters and his crew were like, "Oh no, you're going to kill us!" And he bravely went on, the hero version of Columbus. This was garbage. And one of the things you'll find out in history, there's a lot of hero worship. And the big thing about hero worship is, look at the great hero, the great, almost always man, the great man who did all this stuff. That means they must be great. Exceptional, beyond our capabilities. So we must accept that the great men will lead and we follow. So it's a way to justify like kings and things like that. We saw the same thing in American history. You know, George Washington never told a lie and all that garbage. It's not true. Could be lying. So let's get back to Columbus then. So Columbus made this trip across, find latitude, sailed across. He got a couple islands in the Bahamas. We're not exactly sure which island it was, probably San Salvador. But on this trip, he went to what is Cuba and Hispaniola. Did not find near the gold. Wasn't sure what he had discovered. Knew they were different. He did see that there could be potential there. He also saw a number of American Indians. Arawak Indians who lived on Hispaniola, for example, and was in awe of them. They were the healthiest, strongest. He called just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And of course, he also said we could subdue them and enslave them, because he realized I had to get back to Spain and say, not only I made it to India, but also I made a lot of money. He wasn't sure if he made it to India. But what did he call the people he met? Because they're from India. So that's a little bit of lying to make sure that he gets another trip. He also brought back a number of Arawak to be slaves. As it turned out, half died along the way. They're gonna find out something, and we now know in much more detail how susceptible they were to disease. But he was able to get a third, fourth, and fifth voyage. And each one was bigger and bigger and bigger, with more people to colonize, more people to exploit, more people to take. So that's what we got to get about Columbus. Columbus's voyage would at first part trigger the European colonization of Europe.
Of America?
Did I say Europe?
Yeah.
That would have been quite a shock to colonize the European colonization of Europe. It seems like they're already late. The European colonization of America. And he also made the precedent of absolute exploitation of the people who live. Because it was very clear in Hispaniola, there was virtually no gold. Virtually no gold. How do you suck the wealth out of people to justify the trip if there's no gold? So basically they called it the tribute system, but they basically told everybody there, you must come back with a hot spell full of gold every 6 months. Hot spell is a little bell, so think about a cup of gold, or equivalent of some kind of product every 6 months. Or what? Mutilated. But you're on the right track. Yeah,
Yeah, I
he
was
would
gonna say, wasn't it like complete torture and everything?
It depends on what level they were at. Ideally, it would be like cut off a hand, cut off an ear, cut off your nose. But yeah, a lot of times they would just turn into the most horrific tortures you could imagine. The big one was burning or filleting alive. Yeah. And what happened to the population of the airlines? In about 1500, it's estimated today that there are maybe 8 million Arawaks on that island. Oh, not 50, I'm sorry, 1492. 1492, about 8 million. That seems really high, except for this is it's a big island, and there's a lot of food. And they had trade networks all through. Their Arawak traders went all the way up to Newfoundland, way up here. When Las Casas arrived, a Spanish friar who at first came there to get rich too, but then took sympathy on the remaining Arawaks. There were maybe 50,000. And in 1555, the number of Arawaks on Hispaniola, which today we call Haiti, zero. The Spanish killed thousands for, part of the tribute system or for sport. You know what a mastiff is? The big dog, a mastiff? Big hunting dogs. I mean, they're big, muscular animals. Well, they bred them also for fighting dogs. And it became a big joke fun for them to, as part of Columbus's group to just sick the mastiffs on people. Go sick them on. The brutality was shocking. But there's also something like, and then a lot of Arawaks committed mass suicide. Rather than go through the hell, the Furies came upon them and they had no idea why. But what happened to most of the Arawaks? What happened to most of the native population of the Americans? I didn't put a slide up there, but I should have put a slide up here. Disease. So make sure you get that down. Disease killed virtually all of them. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but why were American Indians so susceptible to disease? And yet when Columbus arrived there, they were the healthiest. They were so much stronger. They didn't seem to have any of the imperfections the Europeans have. That's part of the reason why, these guys can be valuable themselves. We can subdue them. And they don't have our weapons. Do you remember back when we first started this class and I showed you that video about gun germs and steel? Why some areas make it, like Sumeria made it. Why Sumeria made it here as a first civilization. Because what do they have here? Domesticated animals and domesticated plants. Remember domesticated animals? So like cattle, and then pigs from Asia, also birds, and then eventually horses. What domesticated animals come from the Americans? Guinea
Llamas?
pigs? Llamas, guinea pigs. There's dogs. You think of anything else? No cows, no pigs, no goats, at least domesticated goats. Can't domesticate bison. Just can't. We still can't. Virtually every major disease comes from those animals. They had no immunities. As we're having fun with COVID, part of the reason it's so bad is we have no immunities. That's part of the reason why getting a vaccine will supposedly strengthen our immune system. So we got that. That's what happened there. So, once Columbus arrived, he made it back here and told the king and queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, he told them, there's gold beyond anybody's imagination. But here's the big thing. This is a lesson we have to get up. I didn't make a slide of this, so you have to get this down. What was invented 70 years earlier that would allow for this information to spread like wildfire across Europe? The printing press. And now everybody knew what Columbus did. Everybody knew what he said. And what did he say? There were mountains and mountains of gold out there. And especially in the next 50 years when they realized this was not India, this was not China, and the earth is a heck of a lot bigger. And so more explorers are going to follow. These new nation states now are going to become in competition to get the gold so they could increase the size of their empire, increase the size of their army, etc. Yeah.
Was that El Dorado? What was that?
El Dorado was a term, a Spanish term for a city of gold.
Oh.
And so they all thought they were going to go over and find this city of gold. And so, for example, a Portuguese trader, a Portuguese explorer by the name of Amerigo Vespucci, he was going to follow, he actually was going to follow Diaz's route. And by the way, this really shows Da Gama's route, how far Da Gama went. He went way out there to loop around. They eventually found you could kind of do this. But Amerigo Vespucci started here, and he's going to follow the same route to loop around. He's just a few years after Da Gama. And wind caught him, and the next thing you know, where did he end up? Here. And that's why Portugal claimed Brazil. It's because Amerigo Vespucci came here. I should add a thing about Vespucci. A map maker a few years later would make a map of his journey, and he called this Amerigos' land. America. That's where it comes from. That's why we're not, and that's the weird reason why you think it would be called Columbia or something. But Americas. And other ones followed to make their way around here. And here's another very important one. Once that happened, everybody tried to find a way, all right, we got this big landmass. Where do they still want to go? They still want to go here. At first, they tried to go north. It turned out that it's called the Northwest Passage. It didn't work out very well. We'll come back to this. But another person we have to mention, Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan decided to try to take the southern route. Following Amerigo Vespucci, he tried to go around this way. And what did Magellan do? He'd be the first European to do what? First pass-through person. Okay, he didn't do it. But his expedition, Magellan, the first one to sail around the world. Magellan went all the way around the world. So he is on this map. I've got speech on there too, don't I? Yeah, good. So Magellan, and look at this map. That's from the 1600s, or 1600. Look how, that's a good map, isn't it? So it gives you an idea how well they're able to make map. By the way, he went through this straight here, really narrow straight, no one goes around. He just assumed there's all land south there. As it turned out, he could have went a little bit further. By the way, this is a tough area to sail through, because you have to wave from both sides down. Same thing with here. It's like 9 miles deep, just emerge. He went all the way around the world. He actually made it to the Philippines. Portugal tried to claim the Philippines from the people who lived there. Magellan did, and a little bit later on, the Spanish would just take it, named after their king, Philip. That's the Philippines. He'd be killed in the Philippines. The Portuguese enslaved somebody from the Philippines, brought him back to Portugal, sold him to somebody who went on Magellan's mission. And so that man actually circumvented the goal twice. But why Magellan is so important is, okay, I'll come back to this. Oh, I thought I had a slide there. Okay, I thought about putting a slide here. So let's get back to this picture. This is why we got to give Magellan why it's so important. When Magellan made it across from here to here, this is going to trigger a wave of exploration. Starting with Columbus and then Magellan, globalization. Within 10 years, there's going to be Spanish fleets sailing from the Americas to China. all the world became globally connected. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to work on the map, and then we'll finish exploration tomorrow. I really thought I put a picture of it. I'm going to put a picture of globalization. Wonder. By the way, they weren't sure what was on the New World, and so that was one of the most famous creatures. And who's with me? It's so sad there weren't giants with their faces in the middle of their chest. Or the cyanopods, who would lay down and use their big one single foot to shade themselves from the hot American sun.
What is that? That's creepy.
Aren't you sad those don't exist?
Not particularly.
Yeah, that's. I'll tell you a little bit about this. Talk a little about the Aztecs, Columbian exchange, slavery. Yep, good.
Wait, so was Magellan from Portugal?
No, he's Spanish. If I said Portuguese, I'm sorry. He's Spanish.
Okay, I wasn't sure because, well, I couldn't remember. I was like, wait, but if Portugal already went around Africa, then why is he trying to go a harder route?
And the thing about that is that if the Portuguese would have captured him, they would have killed him.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because they had a monopoly.
Is that it for today?
Yep, that's it. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
Have a good day. Bye.